The United States has witnessed some of the most devastating hurricanes in modern history, catastrophic events that have reshaped coastlines, altered communities, and exposed critical weaknesses in disaster preparedness. These storms serve as powerful reminders of nature's overwhelming power and the consequences of human complacency. From the Galveston hurricane of 1900 to Hurricane Maria in 2017, each disaster carries unique lessons about infrastructure, emergency response, and social equity that remain relevant today. Number 1. The Galveston hurricane of 1900, America's deadliest natural disaster. On September 8, 1900, the thriving port city of Galveston, Texas, was obliterated by what remains the deadliest natural disaster in U.S. history. The Category 4 hurricane made landfall with sustained winds exceeding 135 miles per hour and a storm surge reaching 15 feet, towering over the island's highest elevation of just 8.7 feet. The meteorological community failed to predict the storm's path accurately, dismissing warnings from Cuban forecasters who had more advanced tracking methods. This forecasting failure had catastrophic consequences. As the hurricane approached, residents noticed unusual swells, but received no official warnings. When the storm hit, the surge swept across the entire island, destroying more than 3,600 buildings. Witnesses described horrifying scenes of houses disintegrating and people being swept away by the raging waters. The death toll estimates range from 6,000 to 12,000, representing about 20% of Galveston's population at the time. The aftermath presented unimaginable challenges. With so many corpses and limited burial space, authorities resorted to weighted burials at sea. When these bodies began washing back ashore, they were burned on massive funeral pyres. The psychological trauma endured by survivors manifested in what we now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder, with many residents permanently abandoning the island. Galveston's response to the disaster was revolutionary. The city constructed a 17-foot-high, 10-mile-long seawall and raised the entire city's elevation by up to 16 feet in some areas using sand dredged from the Gulf. These engineering feats protected Galveston from future storms, but couldn't restore its former prominence as Texas's leading port, as businesses permanently relocated to Houston. Number 2. The 1935 Labor Day hurricane, a betrayal of America's veterans. The 1935 Labor Day hurricane holds the distinction of being the most intense hurricane ever to make U.S. landfall, with winds estimated at 200 miles per hour. Its impact was magnified by a tragic convergence of natural fury and human failure that specifically targeted some of America's most vulnerable citizens, World War I veterans. Hundreds of veterans had been sent to the Florida Keys as part of a New Deal work program during the Great Depression. They lived in flimsy beachfront barracks constructed just 1 to 2 feet above sea level. When weather forecasts began warning of a potential storm, bureaucratic delays and miscommunication prevented timely evacuation. A rescue train dispatched from Miami arrived too late. As the veterans waited, the hurricane's unprecedented storm surge and winds obliterated their camps. Survivors described a phenomenon called sandblasting, where hurricane-force winds mixed with sand literally stripped flesh from bones. The rescue train itself was swept off its tracks, with only the massive locomotive remaining upright after the storm. The official death toll was set at 408, including 256 veterans, though the actual number was likely higher. The government's response sparked outrage when it classified the deaths as an act of God. Ernest Hemingway, who participated in recovery efforts, wrote a scathing article titled, "Who Murdered the Vets?" criticizing the systemic failures. The tragedy became a rallying cry for improved veterans' rights and disaster preparedness. Number 3. The 1938 New England hurricane, the Long Island Express. On September 21, 1938, one of the most powerful hurricanes ever recorded in the North Atlantic slammed into Long Island and New England with little warning. Dubbed the Long Island Express, This storm rewrote meteorological understanding of northeastern hurricane vulnerability. Several factors made this storm particularly devastating. First, it moved at unprecedented speed, nearly 60 miles per hour, giving coastal residents almost no time to prepare. Second, a high-pressure system blocked its typical path out to sea, forcing it directly into New England. Third, because hurricanes were believed to weaken before reaching northern latitudes, many communities had no evacuation plans. The storm surge reached 20 feet in some areas, completely reshaping coastlines. In Providence, Rhode Island, the downtown area submerged under 14 feet of water. At a luxury resort in Watch Hill, vacationers found themselves trapped as massive waves demolished the building, with some survivors clinging to debris for hours before rescue. The economic impact extended far beyond property damage. The storm destroyed critical manufacturing infrastructure, accelerating the decline of New England's textile industry. Blue-collar workers were disproportionately affected as factories and docks were wiped out. The hurricane killed over 650 people and caused $308 million in damage, equivalent to $5.5 billion today, making it one of the costliest disasters in American history at the time. Number 4. Hurricane Katrina, 2005, a failure of systems. When Hurricane Katrina made landfall on August 29, 2005, it exposed systemic failures that transcended meteorology. While the storm itself was powerful, Category 3 at landfall, the real catastrophe resulted from engineering failures and inadequate emergency response. New Orleans' flood protection system, designed by the Army Corps of Engineers, collapsed at multiple points. Poor soil conditions and design flaws caused levee breaches that flooded 80% of the city, with some areas submerged under 20 feet of water. The disaster unfolded on live television as tens of thousands of residents, predominantly African American and low income, became trapped without food, water, or medical care. The Superdome and Convention Center, intended as shelters of last resort, became symbols of systemic failure. Over 20,000 people endured days in squalid conditions without adequate sanitation. Tragically, many elderly victims died from neglect rather than the storm itself. The official death toll reached 1,833, but the long-term impacts were more profound. Katrina permanently altered New Orleans' demographic and cultural landscape. The city lost over 100,000 black residents by 2010, and many musicians and tradition bearers never returned. Wealthier neighborhoods like the French Quarter recovered relatively quickly, while poorer areas like the lower Ninth Ward still show scars nearly 2 decades later. The disaster revealed America's stark racial and economic divides in horrifying detail. Number 5. Hurricane Maria, 2017 colonial catastrophe. Hurricane Maria's impact on Puerto Rico on September 20th, 2017, exposed the consequences of long-term neglect and the island's unique political status. What began as a tropical wave rapidly intensified into a Category 4 hurricane with 155 miles per hour winds, striking an island already struggling with economic crisis and aging infrastructure. The storm caused the largest blackout in U.S. history, leaving all 3.4 million residents without power. Some rural areas waited nearly a year for electricity restoration. The collapse of the power grid had cascading effects. Hospitals lost generator power, water treatment plants failed, and communication networks went dark. The initial official death toll of 64 was widely disputed. Independent investigations found thousands of excess deaths in subsequent months from medical emergencies, contaminated water, and suicide. A George Washington University study ultimately estimated 2,975 deaths, making Maria one of the deadliest U.S. hurricanes in a century. The federal response was widely criticized as slow and inadequate compared to relief efforts for mainland disasters. This perceived neglect deepened Puerto Ricans' sense of second-class citizenship. The storm accelerated an ongoing population decline, with over 130,000 residents relocating to the mainland, primarily Florida, significantly altering that state's demographics and politics. To conclude, these hurricanes highlight the deadly combination of natural fury and human failure, whether in forecasting, infrastructure, or disaster response. While forecasting has improved since 1900, climate change is increasing hurricane intensity, making preparedness more critical than ever. The lessons from these disasters continue to shape how the U.S. prepares for and responds to catastrophic storms.